Good afternoon. We are at session 6-1, which is on the topic of Kim Jong Un's frontal breakthrough strategy evaluation of the achievements and prospects for 2021. Let us begin our discussion. I am the moderator of this session. My name is Lee Kwan-se. I'm the director of the Institute for Far Eastern Studies at Kyungnam University. Let me introduce our speakers and panelists. First of all, evaluations of the economic side of the frontal breakthrough strategy. This will be covered by Professor Im Chul, Associate Professor of the Institute for Far Eastern Studies. When it comes to the political and military side of the frontal breakthrough strategy, we will be hearing a presentation by Associate Professor Kim Dong-yeop of the same Institute of Kyungnam University. We also have with us Professor Lee Jung-chul. He's joining us as a discussant. And last but not least, from the SKRI Research Institute Research Fellow, Dr. Lee Young-hoon. Thank you for joining us. So we will go into the evaluation of the achievements and prospects of Kim Jong Un's frontal breakthrough strategy. As you know, this year marks the 20th anniversary of June 15th and the 70th anniversary of the Korean War. It also marks the 70th anniversary of the establishment of the Workers' Party of Korea. And also, this year is the last year of the 5-year economic development plan of DPRK. So this year is a meaningful event in many sense. But as you know, the inter-Korean relations and the U.S. and North Korea relations are at a stalemate. So at such a time, we will be looking at the frontal breakthrough strategy. So it would be like a midterm evaluation, and we'll be thinking about how this strategy will impact inter-Korean relations and North Korea and U.S. relations. So I think that this will be a very realistic and pragmatic discussion that we will have. This year, as you probably know, starting from last year, December, there was the Plenary Session of North Korea, of the Workers' Party of Korea, where the frontal breakthrough strategy was adopted. And this was mentioned in the New Year's address as well. Actually, there were 4 occasions when the New Year address was not given: 1957, 1987, 1990, and this year there was no New Year's address. And so if you look at the years where there was no New Year's address, you can see that there were some actually very heavy meaning or significance to the reason why there was no New Year's address. And there was something that actually replaced such an address. So North Korea, well, it is faced with continuous sanctions, and it has already adopted a frontal breakthrough strategy. And we do believe that North Korea is willing to or has adopted a policy to stand against such sanctions with this frontal breakthrough strategy. But there was an unforeseen COVID-19 that hit North Korea, as well as the flood, which had a massive impact on the economy of North Korea. So the North Korean economy is faced with many challenges, which makes it very difficult for North Korea to implement the frontal breakthrough strategy in full-fledged. Of course, in October, there will be the 7th anniversary event celebrating the establishment of the 75th anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea. The various policies pursued by North Korea and its strategy, I think, needs to be reviewed at this point. And also, we have to take a look at what will happen next year for the establishment of perpetual peace in the Korean Peninsula, for inter-Korean relations, for North Korea and U.S. relations. What is needed, what will happen? I think that we will review such issues during the session. And so, as I explained, our first speaker, Dr. Im Chul, will talk about the economic side of this strategy. I will give you about 15 minutes for your presentation.
네,
Thank you for the introduction. As introduced, I am Im Chul. I would like to cover the economic sector of the frontal breakthrough, give you a evaluation and outlook. This frontal breakthrough is very important in understanding the current Kim Jong Un regime. It is a very important policy line and a strategy, as has been said by the moderator. At the end of last year, a massive size of meeting took place. And this meeting was the fifth plenary meeting of the 7th Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea. I would like to cover the agenda, discussions, and resolutions thereof. I would like to be as brief as possible. And then I want to focus more on the implementation of that strategy and the evaluation and outlook. The plenary discussions included a very wide range of topics. In understanding the Kim Jong Un regime today, there are very important key words included in this discussion that we cannot miss. First of all, basically, the current strength of the state, defense capabilities, and success in economic construction were evaluated. And the meeting also looked at the trend of the prevailing situation and evaluation at the time of the meeting, and also the state management, economic work that are insufficient to spur self-reliance and self-development, any issues that had to be overcome in terms of state management and economic work. So based on this analysis, the plenary also looked at the task of the age and the orientation of the struggle. The task and the orientation of struggle is based on the frontal breakthrough policy. And in the economic sector, including social cultural sector as well, the plenary presented a head-on breakthrough strategy. And also political, diplomatic, and military breakthrough strategies were also presented. And overall, it is about after the U.S. DPRK talks collapse, how to construct the economy through a frontal breakthrough was the most important part of the strategy. So if we look at the resolutions of the plenary meeting, the contents of the resolution was very helpful in understanding the economic strategy of the Kim Jong Un regime. Resolution number one, I think, is the most important resolution of all. Number one is about readjusting the economic foundations of the country and enlisting all possible production potentials to fully meet the demand for economic development and people's living. So this ultimately means and is really predicated on the prolonged confrontation. And amid that situation, in order to build the economy in North Korea, all the domestic resources available, economically, human-wise, and more, had to be used to the fullest in order to meet the demand to the maximum extent possible of the people's living. So basically, it's about maximizing supply. And the second resolution in relation to economic development was that there was a particular stress on science and technology and to improve education and healthcare that represents the image of the socialist system. This was before COVID-19 hit. But nevertheless, North Korea took a preemptive move to present a task to improve the healthcare system. And number three was also quite significant. Number three is about protecting the ecological environment and setting up a national crisis control system against natural disasters. So Chairman Kim is faced with many natural disasters, flooding or typhoon this year. And he took an early step to prepare against such natural disasters by setting up a national crisis control system. And this year, looking at the way how North Korea responded to the natural disasters, I think shows that North Korea made some progress in using its national crisis control system to respond to natural disasters. It's very important to perceive the current political situation of North Korea. After Kim Jong Un took power, there has been a series of policy lines announced. In 2013, there was the economic and nuclear development, parallel development, and in 2018, the full focus on economic development. And then in 2019, like last year, the Frontal breakthrough strategy was officially announced. So these new policy lines are developed on the most important foundation that the most fundamental grounds of those policies is how North Korea perceives its geopolitical situation. So North Korea's perception of the geopolitical situation is very, very important, and most of their perception is centered on their relations with the U.S. In 2018 and in 2019, up until early 2019, two summits with the U.S. were held, but lifting of sanctions did not happen, although the denuclearization agreement was reached. So North Korea turned to the self-reliance strategy to render U.S. sanctions useless. So that is the newly formed goal at the plenary. And based on this perception, is the idea that North Korea's realistic decision that it will be very difficult to persuade U.S. to lift sanctions. And also, the frontal breakthrough strategy is important in terms of military diplomacy and politics, but basically the key pillar is the economic foundation, because it is very clearly stated that the key front in this offensive is the economic front. And as the moderator has said, frontal breakthrough it focuses on protracted confrontation with the U.S. So they presume that the confrontation with the U.S. will be protracted and must be handled accordingly. And so the current crisis is to be turned into an opportunity to improve the economic development and also to reinforce internal capabilities, bolster internal resource full mobilization system and crisis response capabilities. So that is the basic orientation of North Korea's response to the current geopolitical situation. And if we look at the elements of the head-on breakthrough strategy or frontal breakthrough strategy, as you can see on the slide, there are 6 major elements. Realigning the system of economic projects in order, revitalizing production in major industrial areas, improving economic management project, establishing top 10 outlook goals, increasing production saving, raising quality in science and technology, developing talent. So these are the key tasks to build the economy. So if we take a closer look at each of these elements, in 2016, there was the 7th Party Committee meeting. And here, the 5-year economic development strategy was announced. In order to achieve the goals of the 5-year plan, and these 6 elements that you see on the slide are also needed. So if much progress can be made on these 6 elements, and reach tangible results, the 5-year economic development plan would be announced, will be considered to be a success as well. So if we look at the area by area, this is the current implementation status. Kim Jong Un at end of last year's 5th plenary of the Central Committee meeting made a very impressive remark saying that North Korea should establish top 10 outlook goals. So despite the fact that the DPRK economy is in a dire state, how could it set up top 10 outlook goals? Kim Jong Un considered these goals I think he presented these goals with the next eighth meeting in mind. In 1980, back when the sixth meeting was held, there was a 10 outlook goals for socialist construction. So back then, in the top 10 industrial area, there were very ambitious goals to boost production. So although the external and internal conditions are quite dire for the DPRK, I think Kim Jong Un aims to achieve economic development and achieve a high level of targets and goals under the top 10 outlook goals. I think that is what we can see here. But setting the top 10 outlook goals, due to COVID-19 and natural disasters, underwent unexpected challenges, and it is very questionable whether these goals can be actually set realistically. And the next important task of the frontal breakthrough strategy is revitalizing production in major industrial areas. In particular, Kim Jong Un stressed the increase in crop production. And secondly, he stressed chemical industry. So as the first achievement of the frontal breakthrough strategy, the DPRK regime stressed the Suncheon phosphate fertilizer plant that opened on May 1st. So this plant was the very first symbolic achievement of the frontal breakthrough policy, according to the DPRK. The fertilizers are used for both chemical industry and the farming industry. Of course, the farming was the top priority for Kim Jong Un, and it seems like they have made some achievements to a certain extent. But of course, the farming will be impacted by the long-term typhoon or flooding natural disasters. So this year's crop yield is unlikely to be boosted. And I'm sure that is where Kim Jong Un is struggling. And as exports and trade with China was suspended, intermediate goods imports have declined dramatically, which has definitely impacted production. And then there is improving economic management project. Kim Jong Un and cabinet meetings at the Supreme People's Assembly meetings. It is often mentioned that economic management projects are very, very at a poor state. And then realigning the system of economic projects and order. This means to set up a strong cabinet-based structure. The party has enough strategies and authorities given to the cabinet, but the cabinet is still struggling to make progress. And then science and technology and developing talents. I think this is where relative progress can be seen. And also, as a strategy to break through sanctions is to increase production and save and to raise quality. Raising quality and increasing production is linked to homegrown production, and that's where most progress is made. And next, improving health projects. Compared to initial goals, I think some progress has been made. In particular, in the post-COVID world, DPRK has been building the Pyongyang General Hospital and has been making additional investments in healthcare. Building a crisis management system, as you have seen, when the typhoons hit, the crisis was given an early warning. People were given an early warning about the crisis, and the damages of the typhoon was reported live. And that seems to suggest that crisis management and crisis control system in the DPRK is progressing. The biggest hit was on the tourism sector with COVID-19 and the shutdown of borders with China. Well, up until late last year, a large-scale tourist spot development and attraction of tourists was a key focal point for Kim Jong Un, but that is exactly the hardest hit area. So all in all, economic frontal breakthrough strategy is really the next best path chosen in the face of impasse with the US and discontinued inter-Korean relations. And taking a closer look, you can see that as soon as Kim Jong Un regime took power in 2012, there were multiple projects, economic projects that started to be rolled out. But the challenges of these projects was presented very specifically and was specifically ordered to be improved on. U.S. relations will take a long time to be improved, and right now, what the DPRK can do in overcoming sanctions is to find out the issues in national and state building and economic construction. So that was the basic message and the execution capability shown at the plenary. And one of the key pillars of the frontal breakthrough policy is, of course, large-scale construction. But here, to the people, these projects can visibly show that achievement and progress is being made despite difficulties. But here, of course, because of COVID-19 and reprioritization of the policies, construction has been bit pushed down the list of priorities. And lastly, protracted confrontation is to be actively utilized as an opportunity to reinforce internal capabilities and improve economic management system, bolster internal resource full mobilization system, and crisis response capabilities. So later during the discussion, I'm sure we will be coming back to this point. And next January, when the 8th party meeting takes place, I will be looking particularly at how to I'm sure that they will attempt at upgrading their self-reliance. And in that process, science and technology will play the biggest role. And right now, the DPRK basically wants to build an economy that is unshaken by external shock, such as natural disasters or COVID-19 or economic situations globally. So North Korea pursues a self-reliant economy. So although this is just an assertion by North Korea wants to home produce with its domestic resources technology the material means needed in the people's lives. And cutting-edge industrial technology will be the key in driving this economic growth led by domestic demand. So this is the perspective we need to have in mind in monitoring the North Korean economic situation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Lim gave us a economic analysis of the frontal breakthrough strategy and the evaluation. You mentioned many things, but for the viewers, when you hear the word frontal breakthrough, you might understand what it means, but as to the background and the cause or rationale, I think you need further information. So in 2018, for the first time in 70 years, North-South Summit was held in 2019 as well. In Panmunjom, there was the U.S. DPRK South Korea Summit. So anyhow, on April 20th, 2018, the key part of the national strategy that was reiterated from March of that year to make a transition towards the economy and to find progress in relations with the U.S. and Korea and to find a new breakthrough. But that failed. The talks with U.S. failed and the sanctions were prolonged. So they, I think, made a shift towards a frontal breakthrough strategy, focusing more on self-reliance to fully mobilize all its resources to stabilize its own regime. I think that was the key decision made here. So just to go over the main points of the discursives of the frontal breakthrough, the main point is to fight the sanctions. And the basic pillar is the economy, as mentioned by Mr. Lim. And the key pillar is self-reliance. And as stressed, the key means would be science and technology, and the direction is farming or agriculture. That is the basic points of the frontal breakthrough policy. And in preparing for a protracted confrontation with the U.S., and North Korea understands that a negotiation will not resolve the issues overnight or in the near future. So they shifted over to frontal breakthrough policy to prepare against that protracted confrontation. So it is a strategic line that the DPRK takes, but in reality, it is called a revolutionary line. And they want to focus all their efforts here. And so we heard about the economic evaluation, but next, Professor Kim will focus on the military side.
평가와 전망
And so we'll listen to how he sees the frontal breakthrough, his achievements and outlook in terms of the military and political aspect. I would like to ask those joining us through our online platform, please utilize the QR code to raise questions. If time allows, we will have the participants, the panelists, and the speakers answer your questions. Now, I would like to ask Professor Kim to look at the frontal breakthrough policy from the diplomatic and political and military perspective. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Kim Dong-yeop. And the moderator and also Professor Im Il-chul, they explained in detail about the background of the frontal breakthrough strategy. So Professor Im Il-chul, he focused on he said the economic field. And I didn't use the word field. I said the military and diplomatic evaluation. So I left out the word field. Now, there is a reason why I did that. The moderator explained the backdrop to implementing the frontal breakthrough strategy. But actually, North Korea wanted to take on a very strong offensive diplomacy or diplomatic approach to fight the sanctions. The frontal breakthrough policy actually is an economic front, economic effort. And the diplomacy here, it's actually a tool rather than a purpose in itself. So in order to achieve the economic objectives, North Korea will be utilizing diplomacy as a tool. So the reason that I'm saying this in the beginning of my talk is because when it comes to the frontal breakthrough strategy, the beneficiary of the frontal breakthrough policy has to be thought about. And from Kim Jong Un and North Korea's perspective, it is the people of North Korea. But from the US or the South Korean perspective, the concerns of the North Korean people, well, to resolve their economic needs and challenges, North Korea is implementing the frontal breakthrough strategy, and as a means for that, diplomacy will be utilized. So, we actually, if we think that the diplomatic or military side aspect of the frontal breakthrough strategy is the objective itself, then we would tend to think the frontal breakthrough strategy is targeting South Korea or the US. But actually, the frontal breakthrough strategy actually is focused on economy, and the diplomatic side and the military aspect actually is just a tool to reach the ultimate objective. So, as it was mentioned, the frontal breakthrough strategy was adopted during the 7th Central Committee 5th Plenary Session, and there was no New Year address. Now, on April 20th, after the breakdown of the Hanoi summit, I understand that the implementation of the frontal breakthrough strategy was probably planned. And also, as you know, there was a dual policy pursuing military and economic development at the same time. But perhaps the frontal breakthrough strategy could already be foreseen given the circumstances, because if the inter-Korean relations or the North Korea-US relations improved, perhaps there could not have been an implementation of the frontal breakthrough strategy. But in fact, I believe that the frontal breakthrough strategy actually provides a turning point for North Korea, because North Korea in the past tried to take a shortcut through the United States. But because the shortcut was not viable anymore, it decided to adopt a long-term perspective and pursue a long-term strategy. So the frontal breakthrough strategy goes even before April of 2019 or 2018. I think that its inception goes even way before that. So in August of 2008, Chairman Kim Jong Un at that time suffered illness, and that is a very critical period of time for North Korea, because that was when North Korea was trying to utilize the six-party talks, and then after the agreements were reached, North Korea moved away from them and started to once again redevelop nuclear weapons. So I think that at that time, Kim Jong Il was suffering illness, and from the perspective of North Korea, national security guarantee is similar to its regime guarantee. But because its leader had fallen ill, in order to maintain the system and the regime of North Korea, after that incident of Kim Jong Un falling ill, the North Korea leadership had to think about how this leadership structure can be maintained. And as in link with that, that was when North Korea started to think about this frontal breakthrough strategy. So I think that after that, the party rules had been advised, and after Kim Jong Il passed away, Kim Jong Un was able to come to power. And so the current frontal breakthrough strategy actually is linked to all of those events going back to that point, back in 2008. So the current frontal breakthrough strategy, in order for us to truly understand this, is that we have to understand it from economic perspective. The core of it is the economy, the mobile phones, the markets, and the GDP. Well, there has been some internal developments within North Korea involving all of these economic aspects. And so at the core of North Korea's new strategy, the frontal breakthrough strategy, is the economy. So we can see that there has been continuous policy changes within the Kim Jong Un leadership, but this has not been sudden. This is actually a gradual change that we have been witnessing in North Korea. So there was the dual policy pursuing military and economic development in the beginning, but gradually there was a change towards a different direction. There was a military first policy, but gradually there was a change towards a party-based system. So you can see that there is gradual change, and this is to minimize the impact or the shock that would be suffered or inflicted on the people of North Korea. And then during the 2060 Party Convention, Chairman Kim Jong Un took power. That would be the first term of Kim Jong Un. And then in 2018, there was another turning point. North Korea decided to no longer pursue a shortcut and decided to implement the frontal breakthrough strategy. So I think that North Korea actually turned around, and this was because of a threat within North Korea. So North Korea decided to focus more on the economy. And through the diplomatic and security policy, North Korea wanted to support the buildup of its economy based on this frontal breakthrough strategy. So this is the survival curve of North Korea, and this is based on Ian Braymer's J-curve. So you can see that there was the seventh Central Committee meeting, and there was a turning point. After that turning point, you can see that actually, you can see that the curve has reached a bottom point and then it goes back up to the upper right. The policy that made this curve go towards the upper right, I believe, is the frontal breakthrough strategy. So at the core of the frontal breakthrough strategy, once again, is the economy to ensure the stability of the lives of the North Korean people. And in 2018, North Korea decided no longer to pursue the shortcut through relations with the United States or relations with South Korea, and decided to pursue a more long-term approach and took on a new strategy. And so the political or the diplomatic or the military policies is just actually a tool to support this economy-based frontal breakthrough strategy. So you can see that North Korea is actually moving away gradually from the military first policy, and you can see that the Galma Peninsula has changed. It is being developed, and there is a focus on economic development model. For example, in May, Kim Jong Un visited the Golma Peninsula in the coast of Myeongsa-simri, and he went to observe the economic developments and the constructions ongoing there. And the head of the Politburo was actually a person who was in charge of these developments. You can see that, having said that, that North Korea has switched or changed its main strategy to focus more on the economy and development. So I've already covered this. So having said that, I think that this change is not triggered simply by the Hanoi trauma back in 2019, but I think that this is something that North Korea had prepared. Even before that, North Korea realized that shortcuts are no longer viable, and it decided that even if it takes a longer time, it will need a new strategy, that it hopes actually were no longer invalid. It hopes meaning that trying to take a shortcut. So the frontal breakthrough strategy has been discussed by many people, and some point out that the frontal breakthrough strategy will be once again reflected in the upcoming 8th Central Committee meeting. I'm not sure whether this exact wording, the frontal breakthrough policy or strategy, will be used, but I think, in my personal view, I think that this strategy itself will continue and have continuity, not because of the external pressure, such as the pressure by the United States, but rather because of the internal threats or the internal risks and the focus on the people's lives within the North Korean society. Whatever the results of the U.S. presidential election may be, and even if Trump is reelected, I think that the situation will be similar to the first term of Trump, or the situation for North Korea will become even more difficult. If Biden is elected, the situation will be even worse for North Korea. So I think that the frontal breakthrough policy is not a short-term policy or strategy that has been implemented ahead of the U.S. presidential election, but rather it's a more long-term strategy. And so, as you know, North Korea has established a 5-year economic plan, and the frontal breakthrough strategy not only presents a short-term goal for 2020, but along with that, it provides a roadmap for the long term as well. It is not just something that is targeting the U.S. presidential election. It's something that will continue. It is there for building up the economy and as a tool for support the economy-based frontal breakthrough policy and offensive measures to ensure diplomatic and military independence will be implemented according to North Korea. And What is most important on this slide here is that the frontal breakthrough strategy of North Korea, the economic side to it, is supported by two things. The first axis would be the offensive diplomacy, and also the second would be the self-reliant military capacity. So what does offensive diplomacy means? Let's say that well, some people tend to think of it in terms of relations with China or relations with the United States. In my view, North Korea's offensive diplomacy is not just about its interests with relations with China, but rather that it's trying to pursue a new form of international relations and multilateral relations. I didn't write it down on the slide, but in 2015, according to the UN, the SDGs, as you know, the SDGs was announced, and North Korea is actually quite active in pursuing the SDGs. So North Korea actually is interested in these international norms, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The mottos of these goals actually is that no country should be left behind. And according to the Nodong Shinmun of North Korea is quite active in pursuing the SDGs. When North Korea talks about the frontal breakthrough strategy and the offensive diplomacy, North Korea says that the countries that tries to implement sanctions will be isolated from the international community. So rather than directly requesting or demanding something from the United States, North Korea is trying to implement international norms of the international community and thereby try to diversify its diplomatic relations. So it's aiming for more long-term relations in the international community to change situation. So having said that, peace and the international norms and international relations are some things that we should consider as we think about the North Korea's new frontal breakthrough strategy. And strengthening North Korea's self-defense capabilities. I think that this was actually a very reasonable decision of North Korea. Now, North Korea has been utilizing conventional military to build up its economy. And also it's trying to modernize its conventional forces. If it modernizes, it doesn't need as many military manpower as it does in the past. As you know, North Korea has been introducing its new weapons, its updated arsenals and missiles. Of course, this would have cost North Korea some money, but nevertheless, you can see that rather than quantitative military expansion, North Korea has been focusing on strengthening the quality of its military force, and it also has been working towards building up its self-defense military capabilities. So just like the offensive diplomacy, what it's trying to do is to utilize the military to ensure that some of the military forces that it had in the past can be used for building up the economy. So there's a greater focus on the economy once again through this frontal breakthrough policy. So if you talk about the significance of the frontal breakthrough policy from a diplomatic and military perspective, I think that this was actually North Korea's efforts to take a more long-term perspective, and it's trying to take a turn towards a different direction, trying something new in the long run. It will be difficult to expect then that U.S.-North Korea relations will improve even after the U.S. presidential election. With that in mind, we have to think about what we should do in terms of inter-Korean relations. So I think that with that in mind, we have to think about what we should do with inter-Korean relations and also the North Korea-US relations and the confrontations. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. So, Professor Kim, you talked about the frontal breakthrough strategy from the diplomatic and military perspective. Now, in North Korea, it says that in order for the frontal breakthrough policy to claim victory, there has to be very strong offensive diplomacy in place. And Dr. Kim, Professor Kim, I'm sure that this will be raised during the discussion, but North Korea on April 20th of 2018 during its plenary session, it took a turn to adopt a strategy that focused on the economy more. And it has decided to give up on pursuing a shortcut, and it started to pursue a more long-term perspective to build up its self-reliance capabilities and self-rehabilitation. And even if the 8th Central Committee meeting opens, Mr. Kim, Dr. Kim mentioned that this frontal breakthrough strategy will continue. And even if there is a change in the internal domestic situation of the United States, there will be no change to the frontal breakthrough strategy. This is something that will continue for the long term. So the North Korean side will pursue economic development, and after the first 5-year economic development plan ends, it will probably come up with another 5-year economic plan. So what was projected is that with the 8th Central Committee meeting upcoming, what kind of economic front will North Korea pursue? What will be the move or the direction that North Korea take? The 5-year economic plan, well, it was not that successful, and this was acknowledged by North Korea. So North Korea will probably come up with not a strategy, but another 5-year economic development plan. So I think that a lot of work will go into coming up with that plan. But once a previous economic plan fails, well, this was what happened in 1993. There is a cushioning period, and that previous plan is improved and modified to come up with another improved plan. But after a strategy had failed, North Korea said that it will release a new 5-year development plan and go straight into the 8th Central Committee meeting. So what do you think about this? I will ask you to respond to that during the discussion. And what kind of strategic front will North Korea adopt? What do you think will be its approach? I think that will be something that we can discuss about. But first of all, I would like to invite Dr. Lee Young-hoon to give your talk, and this will be followed by Professor Lee Jung-chun.
Mr. Lee will focus on the first presentation, and Mr. Lee Jung-chun will focus on the second presentation. Mr. Lee Young-hoon, please. Yes, thank you for the presentation. The paper by Professor Lim gave us a very good explanation about how the frontal breakthrough policy came to be. And you gave a good evaluation and outlook. And there are not very many debatable points here. So I don't have any particular comments about the facts laid out. But I would just like to give a more specific information and also my views. So 3 main points. First, the frontal breakthrough strategy, the wording of frontal breakthrough. So I want to look at this from an economic perspective. And secondly, the key part of the frontal breakthrough policy is self-reliance. And I want to take stock of how far along North Korea is in terms of upgrading self-reliance. And thirdly, the make or break factor of self-reliance and frontal breakthrough would be also with the 8th Party Congress in mind. I would like to go over what kind of strategy North Korea is likely to take. So beginning with the meaning and the background of the frontal breakthrough, I think full information was given by Mr. Lim. So just to recap the terminology of frontal breakthrough, Well, if you look at the expressions used by the DPRK, in the past they seem to be rhetoric, simple rhetoric, but in the Kim Jong Un regime, each and every word selection reflects the reality of the DPRK, which is different from the age of Kim Jong Il. So, frontal breakthrough is not just rhetoric; it is an official policy line, and it is reflective of the content. For Kim Jong Un, when he hits a roadblock, he acknowledges that he has hit a roadblock, and he, I think, is quite competitive, and he wants to just go head on and break through that roadblock. It is quite a preemptive and offensive wording. For example, from 2013, DPRK started to develop its nuclear weapons in full swing. And in face of sanctions, North Korea developed nuclear weapons but also started to focus on economic development in parallel. And recently, regarding the 75th founding anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea, there were some prospects that the founding anniversary event will be quite small because there is not much of what WKPK achieved, but I think DPRK is actually willing to hold a very large event despite the small achievements, and also the 8th Party Congress is coming up next year. So the economic structure or economic policy line and tendency of North Korea, I think, is to just really break through out of the crisis head on, and it is reflected in the terminology. And secondly, there are many contents relevant to self-reliance, and there are three major points. First, with lack of international help and support, North Korea must develop its own science and technology. So development of science and technology is one side. And secondly, not only consumer goods, but the materials of products are to be homegrown. And thirdly, realistic economic management. So those are the three pillars of upgrading self-reliance in North Korea. Homegrown materials and supplies will be done at the industrial sectors. And I will come back to this point. But for realistic economic management, this is about reinforcing internal role of economic control and also being realistic in implementing the state control of the economy and also restoring the economic system as soon as possible. So, in short, DPRK wants to overcome the anarchy, if you will, of the market system. And of course, saving and quality enhancement. So, one by one, this year, the science and technology side of the DPRK is also related to the 75th founding anniversary of the Workers' Party. And there is huge amount of competition going on and fueled. The Joseon Central TV and Rodong newspaper keeps publishing articles on education and R&D and how R&D is commercialized. Researchers and enterprises are stimulated to do better. And what's surprising this year is that scientists and they are making a register of scientists and talents. And the scientists have been dispatched to the production sites to help to promote technological cooperation. And from March to October, the revolutionary period for scientific development has been ongoing, which is quite unusual. This huge rush to develop science and technology until October and November is one characteristic we see this year. And secondly, home development of materials. When it comes to food or disposable goods, home production has made some progress. And next, North Korea is looking at intermediate goods to develop intermediate goods domestically, in particular metal and chemicals. As for metal, this year is considered to be the year that DPRK rises up. So this year they are using technological terms, and they want to use alloy metal to produce accessories. This is an area they are very focusing their efforts on. And if this leads to tangible results by October and November, I think that DPRK will be boasting and showing off those achievements. And also in the chemicals sector, the key point is coal industry is very inefficient. So how to break through that inefficiency and how to show the resilience of the nation in the process. But the problem is, as reports indicate, the smallest progress, or almost no progress, is being made in this metal and chemicals sector. So these will be the areas in the long term. The key focal point for DPRK is home developed technology and home production. And while realistic economic system management, cabinet role will be stressed, as has been so far. What stands out is that socialist enterprise management of the DPRK is very much competitive. Competition is fueled between schools, enterprises, in all sectors in order to boost productivity. And in particular for enterprise, brand competition is very, very remarkable. But this year, the situation turned worse with sanctions prolonging and COVID-19 spreading unexpectedly, turning the situation for the bad. And the economic situation in the DPRK has, as a result, turned to something like a wartime economy. So there is the contradiction. And next, for the strategic production and enhancement of quality, well, this year, because the situation is so bad, increase in production and quality enhancement has always been stressed, but what's most stressed this year is to saving, particularly through reuse of resources and resourcing has become institutionalized this year and encouraged further. So, in a nutshell, going forward, the frontal breakthrough strategy and at the very center of which is self-reliance upgrade, because the PRK's trade with the outside world has shrunk, much will be relying on the home development of intermediate goods and how much science and technology can support home development of intermediate goods, and how efficiently the realistic economic management system can supplant all this to boost productivity. That will be the key point to watch. And lastly, next year at the 8th Party Congress and the 5-year economic plan comes to an end. Well, rather than going into this point, I would like to just come back to this point at the end of the discussion. Thank you. Thank you. The frontal breakthrough policy is an offensive and preemptive nature. And the 5-year plan setting up is also quite offensive. So Kim Jong Un's leadership, the characteristics are revealed there. And the parts that were not covered by Mr. Lim, such as science and technology or metals or chemicals, are quite important, and those areas were covered by Mr. Lee as the make or break factor of the home development of technology and intermediate goods, and the make or break factor as a self-reliance and frontal breakthrough policy. and how much science and technology will be able to supplant the home development of these intermediate goods, and how the realistic socialist economic system will be able to supplant all that. So you gave us a very good big picture about the economic situation at a high level. So why don't we hand over the mic to Mr. Lee Jung-chul?
과 얘기를 듣고
And after we listen from him, we can go into the discussion. So, Professor Lee, please go ahead. Yes, I heard the presentation by Professor Kim, and always there are some contentional points in his presentation. But today, actually, there were not many contention points or any points that I have to raise issue with, luckily. Now, Professor Kim, what you have been saying about the frontal breakthrough strategy from a large perspective is that North Korea's decision making, is it influenced by external factors, or is it determined by domestic factors and mechanisms? Looking at from this perspective, I think that Professor Kim is emphasizing the latter, that decision-making is actually more determined by the domestic factors and mechanisms. So regardless of the external factors, North Korea has been making decisions taking into consideration the domestic situations. If you look at the frontal breakthrough strategy, well, I believe that Professor Kim is seeing this strategy in this light. So he mentioned this during his presentation, that the presidential election in the United States is not really that relevant to the U.S. presidential election. So the U.S. presidential election is not that related to the adoption of the frontal breakthrough policy and its continuity as North Korea goes into the 8th Central Committee. So I think that rather, the frontal breakthrough strategy is actually a short-term front. And I think that North Korea, when it reaches the 8th Central Committee, it will actually implement a new strategy and a new plan. I think that it has coordinated its schedule, and I think that that is actually a good signal. So the frontal breakthrough strategy spirit will continue, but when North Korea begins the 8th Central Committee term, then the motto of North Korea, or the slogan of North Korea, well, I think will be a new motto will be announced to prepare for 2021. Now, in terms of the 8th Central Committee, I think that why is it that the party convention of the 8th Central Committee is being prepared at this point? Now, during the 7th party Congress, well, actually, this has already taken place. And I think it's only natural that North Korea is actually preparing for the 8th Party Congress as it prepares for a new 5-year economic development plan. And I think that it's good that North Korea is preparing for the 8th Party Congress because North Korea announced its intention to focus all of its concentration, its efforts on economic development. As you know, before that, North Korea officially declared that it will pursue military and economic development simultaneously through the Pyeongjin 노선. But then North Korea actually discarded this Pyeongjin Noson, or the dual plan to develop military and nuclear weapons and economy at the same time. And it took a turn to focus solely or entirely more on the economy. So this kind of a change in North Korea's position will be, in my view, officially adopted and announced during the 8th Party Congress by announcing the new 5-year economic development plan. So I think that the 7th Party Congress will officially be discarded, and starting with the 8th Party Congress, we will see that this 5-year economic plan will be announced. And so this, I believe, in my view, is a positive sign. And also, the reason that the 8th Party Congress is being held can be viewed in the sense that North Korea is continuously trying to make its country a Labor Party-centered normal state. So it's no longer in an emergency state, but it wants to make it a normal state that focuses its activities centered around the party. So it's trying to stabilize its system and also institutionalize its system. So you can predict that there will be greater stability within North Korea and its system. So having said that, I think that North Korea holding regularly its party congress, actually, that is an index to show that its socialist system is stabilizing, so that can be a positive light. And I think that we can expect that North Korea will try to pursue a more stable economic development based on the spirit of the Frontal Breakthrough Strategy. Now, I talked about whether North Korea makes its decisions based on domestic factors or external factors. If you look back at the 7th Party Congress, you can see that the Party Congress meeting took place at a very grim situation, during a very grim situation. So 5 months before the 7th Party Congress, there was a nuclear testing that took place by North Korea. And then after the 7th Party Congress, 4 months later, there was the 5th nuclear testing. So you can see that in between these two nuclear testings, there was a 7th Party Congress. And also, during that time, the Kaesong Industrial Complex closed down and inter-Korean relations deteriorated. So the 7th Party Congress, well, that is back in October 30th of 2016. So if you look at that date before and after that date, you can see that China's number 5 figure from the Politburo of China visited North Korea, and the deteriorated North Korea-China relations actually improved because of that visit. So the 7th Party Congress took place at a very difficult period of time for North Korea. But as it was mentioned before, well, regardless of external factors, North Korea actually has decided to carry on a party congress in order to further systemize and institutionalize its state system. So despite that, external factors, of course, inevitably has an impact on North Korea. And having said that, I personally believe that we have to keep a keen eye on how the situation in North Korea will unfold. So before the 8th Party Congress schedule was announced, the Kim Jong Un actually made an announcement. And this was actually something that was quite unexpected, because if you track the events, you can see that North Korea, well, up till the end of last year, talked about a Christmas present. And as an alternative to the Christmas present, North Korea has been talking about a frontal breakthrough strategy. And I'm not sure whether it's because of this or influenced by this, but in June of this year, the inter-Korean relations tension reached its peak. And on July 10th, when the tension reached its peak, Kim Jong Un made an announcement, which is mainly about North Korea-U.S. relations at a point, whether they have to decide whether dialogue should continue or not. And number two, there will be no Christmas presents. So this was a message to the United States. And number three, that does not mean that we have hope or expectations for a U.S.-North Korea summit, but nevertheless, personally, they're open to meeting with the U.S. Well, the expression used was that they can accept a DPD. So there were four messages. That was the core of the announcement made by Kim Yo-jong. And since then, we can see that when it comes to external relations or relations with the US or South Korea, North Korea is keeping its silence. What does the silence mean? I think that we have to wait and see. So then what would be the next thing for North Korea? Well, I think we have to wait and see. Everything will be determined by the time, probably, of the 8th Party Congress, and this is a variable that is closely linked with the U.S. presidential election. Now, perhaps North Korea's decision-making, as Dr. Kim stated, what I just said might be different from what Dr. Kim stated, saying that North Korea's position or decision-making is irrelevant of external factors. But I do believe that if the political and diplomatic aspects of the frontal breakthrough policy is determined by is the foundation for the party position, then I do think that external factors would have an influence on North Korea's decision-making. So personally, I believe that the economic system of North Korea after 2017, that was when the UN sanctions have been intensified. Well, many economists believe and assess that the economic situation of North Korea has deteriorated since that point. But if you look at the various indices, you can see that the UN sanctions have not had that much of an effect. However, the 2020 COVID-19 has had an impact on the North Korean economy. But that is a global phenomenon, actually. And I think that the North Korea system actually has, because it has experienced some hardship in the past, actually has greater tolerance towards such shutdowns caused by the pandemic compared to other countries. So the plans that will come out of the 8th Party Congress, I believe, will have long-term objectives. That is my prediction. And last but not least, now I continue to talk about the 8th Party Congress that will take place. There's about 6 months remaining. And then, does that mean that North Korea's future direction is set? I don't think so. So I think that North Korea and I think that there are some different expectations. For example, there is views that we have to wait and see. We don't know. There are views that some things are already fixed. There are diverse views. But I think that everything is a moving progress. North Korea is still contemplating about what it should do. North Korea is still considering what it has to change. So I don't think that anything has been fully determined or has been fixed. So I think that the greatest concern for the upcoming Eighth Party Congress is probably about the 5-year economic development plan. Should the economy be dependent upon China, or should it be more based on self-reliance, or should there be more cooperation with South Korea? I think that those are some of the things that North Korea will be thinking about. So there are a couple of months left, perhaps 3 or 4 months. The attitude or the behavior of South Korea, the behavior or attitude that South Korea shows to North Korea over the course of the next 3 or 4 months actually can influence North Korea. So we have to think about what we should do in the upcoming 3 to 4 months, South Korea should do. In particular, I think that what we can do is at this point when North Korea is resisting all inter-Korean exchanges or cooperation, we cannot just stand still. So whether North Korea accepts our suggestions and proposals, I think that there are many things that we can do, many suggestions and proposals that we can make, so that we should make proposals so North Korea can consider them. And in terms of peace, I think that South Korea has a very important role to play. Now, we talk about the paradox of self-independence or self-reliance. But when it comes to inter-Korean relations, actually, well, I think that North Korea might sometimes have a different opinion about autonomy and increasing the national defense budget or implementing or adopting new weapon system. These are acts to enhance our autonomy. But from North Korea's perspective, this actually might trigger some concerns or tension from the North Korea side. So I think that as North Korea prepares for the 8th Party Congress, I think we have to be cautious about the attitude or the position that we take. And I agree with what was mentioned in the presentations. For the next 3 to 4 months, we have to make the utmost efforts. Regardless of whether North Korea is willing to accept our proposal or not, I think that South Korea has to make efforts and show genuine efforts to engage in cooperation diplomatically with North Korea. So this has to go in line along with making prospects and outlooks about what North Korea will do.
There can be other perspectives such as internal factors, external factors, to understand the frontal breakthrough strategy. And going forward in making decisions on strategies and plans, I think that South Korea shouldn't just sit idly by, but try to influence DPRK decisions. I think that was the gist of what Mr. Lee Jong-chul was saying. And in that sense, of course, the policy lines of North Korea is subject to change. There's no fixed decision made yet. And of course, the stress points could be different too. So things remain fluid at the moment. But the all-out concentration policy for economic building, I think, will remain intact as DPRK develops another strategy. So I think that was also another message from Mr. Lee. And since the 5-year economic development plan ends this year, next year another 5-year plan will be naturally announced. But some people actually say that in regards to the new presidential office to come in through the elections at the end of the year, that can also influence situation in the DPRK. So I want to focus more about where the stress points will be lying. Of course, things remain very fluid, but just to think of the situation right now. So far, as sanctions continued on against the DPRK, North Korea set up a frontal breakthrough policy as a strategy to work out of its crisis that comes from sanctions. But unexpectedly, because of COVID-19, the border had to be shut down with China. There was no longer trade with China. Plus, there's typhoon and flooding. So that probably weakens the drive for self-reliance. But nevertheless, as the regime pushes forward with self-reliance, what can the DPRK do while its relations with South Korea is also at a stalemate? But in January, of course, they were fully aware of that the fifth plenary is 6 months away. So they are set to announce a new five-year plan for economic development. On April 11th, the seventh Politburo meeting was held. Already, the goal set out at the fifth plenary was implied to be readjusted. So building the Wonsan Karma Coast Resort was to be readjusted. This was already announced before a decision was made. So DPRK was aware of the need to reprioritize its goals. And they also, interestingly, stressed the importance of saving or guaranteeing the lives of the people, and that the frontal breakthrough policy is a revolutionary line. But in the editorial in May, it calls it a scientific struggle. So that is a downgrade from a revolutionary line. And in May, at the 14th Politburo meeting, there's power, metals, chemicals, and coal. But coal and chemicals will be the key from now on, and everything else was taken away. So they set up new plants and industries, and which also accompanied on the field instructions. And on August 13th, at the 16th Politburo meeting, large-scale reshuffling was conducted. There were 5 new members added to the presidium. Park Bong-ju and another person, economic expert, was included, and the prime minister was replaced. And then a week later, on August 19th, the 8th Party Congress was announced to be held, and here the economic development would be developed and announced. So there are many different internal evaluations and expressions used. Unexpected challenges made it necessary for North Korea to take on new policy lines and strategies. So already back then, new plan was being set up and rearranged. In the past, as I said earlier, in 1993, when the 7th five-year plan was announced, when the goal was not achieved, 2-3 years buffer period was given to achieve the goals. But Kim Jong Un opts to give up the goals and replace them with new goals. So I think the highlight points would be that we cannot ignore diplomatic and political arena, but if you look at the many different editorials coming out of it, DPRK, the economic side, the all-out concentration and highlights will be placed on economic building, from enterprise management system. The power has been delegated and decentralized, and the mechanism was expanded throughout the society. But right now, the economy is in a very poor shape, so the resources could return to centralized mode. And if that happens, diplomatic, military, and political external factors could be important, but the more stress will be placed on economic side to break through the internal situation in the DPRK. The and Mr. Both two discussants stress the all-out concentration policy for economic building to remain intact in the next year's plan and strategy line. So, and at the end of the discussion, you said that there's no need to unnecessarily provoke the PRK, but try to think of what influence we can have on the PRK as they make their decision. So, just to, in a nutshell, at the Eighth Party Congress, although the policy line to be announced can be remains fluid, what kind of where would the emphasis be after the Hanoi talks collapsed? Through a state address, North Korea announced self-reliance and self-development, and based on that note, the frontal breakthrough policy was announced. So at the Eighth Party Congress, what do you think will be the decision taken by the party?
Well, before the Eighth Party Congress, I think that, well, actually, I have a similar view that was expressed by Dr. Lee Jung-chul, but I think that the effect of the sanctions, well, there are some effects. Of course, it's not as big as we had anticipated. Now, North Korea was developing nuclear weapons, and at the same time, North Korea started to think about what it should do to respond to possible sanctions. And that was when it was pursuing building up its domestic capabilities. So, as it was mentioned, there was a move to enhance competition and also improve productivity in order to make the impact of the sanctions as small as possible or to make them moderate. So we tend to think that sanctions would lead to a shock to the North Korean society, but actually, there has been efforts by the North Korean side to absorb the shock of the sanctions, to moderate them, and then there was a COVID-19, which was really unexpected. So we don't know how long the situation will continue. And the COVID-19 is a factor that can lead North Korean society into uncertainty. Because, well, North Korea could make preemptive preparations because the sanctions could be foreseen. But COVID-19, this was totally unforeseen, and it had to instantly respond as it was hit by COVID-19. So already, the trade between China and North Korea had weakened, and North Korea was influenced by that already, and then it was hit by the COVID-19. But how long will the COVID-19 situation continue? That is a question. And so, anyhow, the Eighth Party Congress, during that Congress, we will see what kind of direction North Korea will take for its economy. There are views that it will continue to try to rely on China, or that it will move towards further cooperation with South Korea, or it will try to further strengthen its self-reliance. But basically, we believe that North Korea will probably go towards greater self-reliance, pragmatically speaking, and also officially developing its own science technology is not enough to build up its self-reliance, and therefore it will probably open up all possible options. I don't think that it will intentionally cut off other options. Rather, I think that North Korea will be more active in improving relations with Russia and China. And also, when it comes to relations with South Korea, I do believe that it will not be explicit in pursuing stronger ties or greater exchanges, but it will try to continue exchanges with South Korea in some sense. So, in the long term, I think that North Korea will continue to pursue a self-reliance as part of the key policy line. And the reason that it has decided to resort to self-reliance was because it has to meet the needs of the North Korean people. And also, there was a need to develop the science and also the healthcare sector. And then also the environment and natural disasters was another challenge that North Korea was faced with. When it comes to healthcare and also the natural disaster issues, I think that North Korea has been trying to make preemptive preparations and try to implement preemptive measures. And what we can vividly see, especially starting with this year, is that the pandemic and also the climate change impacts has been quite more tangible starting with this year. We talk about the New Deal approach or green growth, and likewise, North Korea, they use a different terminology, but they have a similar policy that is similar to the green growth or the New Deal policy that we have in South Korea. And that's kind of similar or in line with the self-reliance policy line that North Korea has been trying to adopt. So it is trying to pursue a self-reliant economy. And another thing is that North Korea is focusing on digital economy as well. North Korea is preparing for the fourth digital revolution as well. Up till now, it has been speaking about a figures-based economy. But I think that North Korea will become more active in trying to pursue digital transformation. And I think that more terminology related to the digital economy will be mentioned by North Korea going into the future. If you look at the global trends, we can see digital economy evolving and also science technology developing. And I think that we can see those kind of trends in North Korea along with self-reliance. These digital economy, science technology development, self-reliance will be some of the core aspects of North Korea's policy line.
If you look at Dodong newspaper, DPRK keeps mentioning unexpected challenge. Appropriately handling or responding to such unexpected crisis was not done successfully, and that is where the current dire situation is stemming from. And they have a very anatomical analysis of the situation, and based on that, they want to develop a next 5-year plan. So I want to ask you, in 2016 at the 7th Party Congress, there was the 5-year plan announced. Back then, do you think DPRK did not have sanctions in mind when they announced the 5-year plan, right? And after they announced it, sanctions were imposed and intensified. So I'm sure that achieving all the goals of the 5-year plan was very difficult. So DPRK wants to set up another 5-year plan and start anew. That is my personal view. And some of the audience have uploaded their questions online. So since we have 25 minutes left, and they also specifically directed their questions to certain speakers. So I would like to ask those questions to each of you. First, to Professor Lim. The question is, reliance on China growing, and support from China and Russia will be very much needed by DPRK. To what level do you think cooperation will unfold? And to Professor Kim Dong-yeon.
The question is, you said that the bilateral meeting was declared, but you said that there might be a turn towards pursuing multilateral talks or multilateral relations. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? So perhaps North Korea might turn to brinkmanship or offensive diplomacy. So do you think that there is a possibility that North Korea might try to use that kind of brinkmanship to pressure the United States in the future? And also multilateral negotiations. Do you think that a multilateral dialogue framework different from the six-party talks will take place like you said? And if so, then what would be the specific format or the details of this kind of new multilateral dialogue channel?
Mr. Lim, could you answer the questions? You have enough. You can take as long as you would like. So thank you, first of all, for the great question. In the face of COVID-19, the biggest pressure point to the DPRK economy would be the suspension of trade with China and the border shutdown. So as a consequence, the trade volume with China has shrinked from January to June. In the first half of the year, bilateral trade with China dropped by 67% YOY, which is a huge drop. If COVID-19 continues, even if DPRK wants to rely more on China, it will not be able to do so. So the Chinese or North Korean entrepreneurs engaging in border trade with one another say that because of the COVID-19 situation, the border control has become much more stringent, and items that are traded are very meticulously inspected. Through all these processes make it very difficult for DPRK China trade to flow. So basically, mutual reliance between DPRK and China is very, very unlikely to intensify. Although as sanctions grew, DPRK tended to rely more on China, but because of COVID-19, DPRK doesn't even have the option to rely on China. And as the discussants have mentioned, the fundamental question that arises is, well, Kim Jong Un tries to move away from too much reliance on China, which can be seen in their efforts to develop technology domestically and on their own. The economic building strategy that Kim Jong Un pursues is centered around the idea that whether it's China or South Korea, DPRK cannot rely on the outside world to develop its economy. That is unsustainable. So despite the hardship, the DPRK no longer wants to repeat the cycle of receiving external help and recovering economy, because that will make DPRK weak and reliant on the outside world whenever hard times hit. So I think that is the basic concept that Kim Jong Un is making very clear. In this context, although DPRK is in a very, very difficult situation, And I think it's very much likely that DPRK will adjust its level of reliance on China. And regarding frontal breakthrough policy, the officials, the party officials, have a huge role to play according to this breakthrough strategy. So this includes corruption, the idea of privilege are pointed out as problems. But what I was quite impressed by was in difficult times, relying on other people should no longer be. So Kim Jong Un stressed that reliance on the outside world should be shed, and stresses that DPRK should not receive international help, not even from international organizations. Although the times are hard, DPRK wants to use their own money and resources and capital to overcome the current crisis. So that is really I think, how we should put the frontal breakthrough policy into perspective. Since I'm running out of time, I need to wrap up. I think frontal breakthrough policy is a policy to build a new DPRK that is different from the past. Yes, in relation to what you said, one more question before we move on to Mr. Kim. We did not read the reports, but COVID-19 was declared to have ended in China by President Xi Jinping as of September 8th. So since China declared the end of COVID-19, what will happen to its trade with the DPRK? So if COVID-19 is truly done in China, what will happen to the bilateral trade flow? Well, right now, with regards to the COVID-19 situation in the DPRK, China believes that DPRK is far from resolving the COVID-19 crisis. So the official announcement by DPRK that there is 0 confirmed patients in DPRK, I don't think China trusts that announcement. So until it is objectively proven that COVID-19 is fully overcome in North Korea, then China will send tourists and engage in more trade with DPRK. So even if COVID-19 was declared to have ended in China, I don't think that alone will be enough to resume trade flows and tourism and all that and exchanges with North Korea, although it is a positive progress. We need to wait until DPRK's end of COVID-19 is confirmed before that can happen.
김동엽 박사님.
Yes, Professor Kim Dong-yeop, can you answer the question that was raised to you? Yes, I think that there were 2 questions. First of all was about the negotiations, the format of the negotiations going into the future, first of all. Now, to explain this, I think first I have to explain about the concept of sanctions. So what was discussed today, among what was discussed, the moderator said that sanctions are constant. I also believe so. Sanctions are constant. When the 7th Party Congress took place in 2016, North Korea announced the economic development strategy. At that time, did North Korea think that sanctions was a constant? It did not, probably. But now it does, and that's why it has come up with with that in mind, it has come up with the frontal breakthrough strategy. So next year, it was mentioned by our discussant that the frontal breakthrough policy will not be given up, but rather it will be absorbed into the next policies and plans. So I think that there might be a name change to the frontal breakthrough policy, but it will be absorbed and lay a foundation. So having said that, if the sanctions are left as a constant, and if I was Kim Jong Un, I would think that I would believe that sanctions would not be lifted. And with that in mind, he will prepare for the Eighth Party Congress and plan and come up with the next 5-year economic development plan with the worst case scenario in mind. So I think that, of course, there are many possibilities, and North Korea will have all possibilities in mind. But I think that that's the basic thinking of North Korea, probably. So North Korea probably will no longer have high expectations about upcoming talks. Of course, it will open up the possibility of inter-Korean talks because of the deteriorated relationship with China. But Russia actually had requested for the UN to lift the sanctions, and I understand that that request is still in existence. Russia is still pushing for that, and I think that this kind of issue will continue. So it's not just about North Korea and Russia trying to improve relations, but actually, North Korea in the long term will try to pursue for new relations. And right now, the moratorium is in place. And North Korea will probably pursue multilateral relations, and also within the UN framework, it will try to go for a different option. So because the US have implemented sanctions, I think that North Korea will try to opt for some kind of a framework that will be in its interest, considering the situation of the Korean Peninsula. So I think that the next multilateral negotiation channel will be different from the six-party talks. North Korea will try to implement international norms into this multilateral dialogue channel, and that is a direction that North Korea will try to take. So having said that, I think because sanctions is understood as a constant by North Korea, there was another question about what if North Korea utilizes brinkmanship to pressure U.S. Well, I don't think that U.S. will make any concessions, even if North Korea adopts that kind of a diplomatic front. Just because there's provocation by North Korea, I don't think that U.S. will make concessions. So like I said, the frontal breakthrough policy, the diplomatic and military aspect actually is a tool to support economic development. And so but you have this understanding that diplomacy and military is an objective in itself when it comes to the frontal breakthrough policy, but that is not so. So I don't think that Kim Jong Un wants to try to change something utilizing diplomacy. Of course, North Korea is developing new weapons, but what it's trying to do is it's trying to build up its self-capacity, independence, to support the self-reliance, to build up the economy for the North Korean people. So having said that, I think North Korea will prepare for the Eighth Party Congress, and it will come up with a new slogan. But that will be the basic thinking of North Korea. And whatever happens to the presidential election and what kind of changes arise, I think that North Korea will not have much expectations that the presidential election will impact them heavily. It's just preparing, regardless of the outcome of the presidential election.
There was a question to myself as well, internal, external, which side it will be more stressed in North Korea's future policy line? Well, I think that answer has already been fully answered. Earlier, Professor Lee Jung-chul mentioned about the future inter-Korean relations and how South Korea should continue to work to influence the DPRK. In the run-up to the Eighth Party Congress and a setting up of a new policy line and a new presidential office to be elected this year in the U.S., well, against this backdrop, we should move away from the inertia in approaching DPRK, and we should overcome distrust, confrontations in terms and stalemate in U.S. DPRK relations and inter-Korean relations. So to break through this situation and to create a new setting, we must work hard. And with the Eighth Party Congress, North Korea is already setting itself onto a new path. But what kind of approach should South Korea take to positively influence DPRK? And by next year at least, how can we see true progress? And what do we need to do to build the foundation for that progress to come next year? So I would like to, just on a concluding note, ask you to briefly comment on those points.
제가 제일 마지막
Yes, I think I mentioned this in the last part of my talk, but when it comes to inter-Korean relations, I think that the major role of South Korea is the role of ensuring peace. I think that's the most important role that South Korea can play. Now, there is another U.S.-Korea joint training, military training in March next year. And I think that there could be even greater tensions arising at that time than we experienced in June. So if we do not wisely deal with that situation, we will be even greater tensions rising on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, there is a goal of improving inter-Korean relations that has been announced by the leadership of South Korea. I'm sure that we'll be able to overcome this challenge. But this role of ensuring peace on the Korean Peninsula, well, South Korea has made many promises and commitments related to this. But if we do not take action at that period of time to stop heightening of tensions, then that would just make South Korea a country that does not abide by what it has promised. So South Korea has to continually show its determination and will to serve as a stepping stone towards building perpetual peace on the Korean Peninsula. And number two, the Ministry of Unification of South Korea, regardless of the response of North Korea, continues to make proposals to North Korea. The minister is making great efforts. There are people who criticize him or make fun of him, poke fun of him, but I think that he's doing a great job. So he talks of actually, we have to continue to make these gestures and proposals, what we want to do with the counterparty, what is our wishes and hopes for our relations. So I think that also the local autonomous governments, of course, it will need the post-approval of the Ministry of Unification, but regardless of that, I think that the local governments can play a role in improving relations with North Korea. So I think that regardless of the government-to-government relations between the two Koreas, the local governments are doing a lot in terms of exchanges with North Korea. And so the local governments can engage in the grassroots level inter-Korean cooperation. So the local governments can actively pursue such grassroots level cooperation. And this actually can be a great motivation for promoting inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation. So the local governments have to continuously announce their plans to cooperate with North Korea, and they have to come up with new plans, and these have to be in the limelight, so that next year, I think that we have to make the local government's efforts to work with North Korea more tangible. Yes, and Dr. Kim, or Professor Kim, for improvement of inter-Korean relations, what do you think is needed? Your comments? Well, I think everything has been already mentioned by Dr. Lee. I agree fully. So I think that the genuine willingness towards peace by South Korea, even if it is one-sided and unilateral, we have to continuously show that kind of a commitment, even though there is no response from North Korea. So the April Panmunjom Declaration and the September Pyongyang Declaration, and also the June 15th. Well, there's a striking difference between those declarations and the June 15th agreements, because the difference is peace. So I think that the two inter-Korean summits has opened up a new era of peace on the Korean Peninsula. So having said that, I think that in our daily lives and also within the lives of the Korean people, the North Korean and the South Korean people, we have to ensure that peace is there, that we can establish peace. We say that we live in an uncontact or untact era because of COVID-19. Maybe it's only natural that we cannot meet with the North Korean side at this time when it's difficult to have direct contact with other people. I think that rather than disputing whether we should meet, make agreements, and keep and abide these agreements, and try to make sure that the other side abide the agreements made, the promises made, I think that we should make our own efforts, genuine efforts, to promote peace and keep our commitment to ensure peace. Dr. Lim?
Yes, today we discussed the frontal breakthrough policy of the DPRK in depth. But in the context of the frontal breakthrough policy, possibility of inter-Korean cooperation seems to be small. That is the harsh reality we face. Nevertheless, as Professors Lee Jong-chul or Kim Dong-yeop mentioned, I completely agree. In whatever way possible, we need to show our sincerity to improve inter-Korean relations to DPRK. And that can be the beginning towards going through improved inter-Korean relations. Harder the situation is, the more we need for small success stories. Thank you. And Dr. Lee? In the interest of time, well, the breakthrough in exchanges between the two Koreas, considering climate change and abnormal weather events, I think we should find a breakthrough in prevention of infectious diseases or natural disaster response. The union of divided families is, I think, no longer valid. Even under sanctions, we need to find a way possible. One such way of cooperation can be prevention of infectious diseases and environmental issues, to be realistic. Because right now, while the pandemic and environmental issues are global issues well recognized by the world, and it'll be very easy for us to understand, make the rest of the world understand. And we should start there and then gradually expand cooperation to other areas, to be realistic. But right now, we are in very difficult times. Rather than contracting, I think we need to be more active and knock on the door of the DPRK in order to show our sincerity. Thank you very much. I think all four speakers mentioned a similar point. In this transitional time, we need to do what we can to paint the big picture and the little picture, to be realistic. And the Ministry of Unification, as they start with small steps, I think ultimately they can take big steps as well. They can start by beating the DPRK at a lower level and smaller level, and then gradually expand that. So regaining mutual trust will be the key in creating the drive engine. And the key point in regaining trust is to live up to the commitment made. And once we can do that, we can rebuild trust. To follow through with the commitment, we can start by doing small things and then gradually lead to go for larger things. So the April 17th agreement and June 15th agreement must be followed through under a strategic policies, and that is really the key. And at the 8th Party Congress, new policy and plans will be released by DPRK, which we should closely monitor and analyze to reset the relations with DPRK and also for cooperation with the UK, China, and Russia in order for us to find a new breakthrough out of the situation. And in that sense, the basic policy line of the frontal breakthrough policy by DPRK, we had an economic side of evaluation and also an evaluation from political and military and diplomatic side to look at what kind of direction DPRK is taking now and what will they take in the future. We had an in-depth discussion, and such discussion and analysis will need to be answered in order for us to better understand the path that North Korea is taking. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the speakers and the audience for posting your questions. Since we have reached the end of the session, I would like to conclude the session. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'd like to thank the presenters and discussants, the staff. And with that, I conclude this session, Kim Jong Un's Frontal Breakthrough Strategy Evaluation of Achievements and Prospects, hosted by the Institute for Far Eastern Studies at Kyungnam University. Thank you.